All right, welcome to tutorial number 1 for our throw and hit games. What we're trying to do is, I guess we'll start here. There was a game for the Ataris back in the 1990s. You can see right here for a PC game in 1990 where you have two players that are these two gorillas that show up in these random spots, and they throw these bananas at each other. So you can see up here you're supposed to put in your angle. This person's putting in some really big number. There we go, 33 seems a little bit better. An angle and velocity, then the bananas get thrown, and you're trying to hit the other person. So it's a turn-based game where you have this gorilla goes first, and then this one, and back and forth, and you're just putting in these different angles and velocities to try to hit the other person. Once you hit the other person, there's a little celebration that goes on, and then a new map comes out with different buildings and a whole different setup. Of course, if it was the same every time, you would know the angle and velocity you would have to hit, so of course it has to change. So this is what we're trying to recreate. Pause this, and we'll go back into here. So on Scratch, this is what I created as a similar type of format, and what I want you guys to recreate, of course, with some other of your own personal elements in here. A couple things that are way different. We have sprites that are clicked in order to be able to fire the bananas back and forth with the two different dinosaurs. You can see there's some costume changes with the dinosaur throwing the actual banana. And of course, when the person is hit, I think 31 is the perfect number here. Right, when this one's hit, we have to change position. Otherwise, you just keep hitting them and increasing your score. So for our first tutorial, what I want to do is go through throwing the objects back and forth, so throwing the bananas. Everything else after that, we'll get into with other tutorials. So this is mainly what we're trying to do right here. Come up with, I had a cat throwing a basketball, and we want to talk about what gravity is, change in y, and our change in x as we're throwing things back and forth. So starting up with our new project here, we'll keep the cat. We'll bring him down in size. So we'll bring it down about 50%, and we'll put it right down here. We will get a new sprite. We'll stick with the same basketball. Why not? I think I brought it down to smaller size of 40. So we want the basketball to start at the cat. So the cat's going to be throwing the basketball out over here. Because we're doing all these different throws, change in Y, change in X, I find it's very helpful to have a reset button. So I'll actually just have when the R key is pressed, we want this thing to go back to the point that it's at right now. Because it's going to get thrown all over the screen. So every time I hit R, it'll just go right back to the cat. Okay, so for starters here, we'll have this thing get thrown up in the air. We'll change the Y coordinates. So we'll say when the flag is checked, that'll be for throwing the ball. We're going to want to forever change Y by, we'll say 10. Right? So if we click this, it's just going to go up in the air. All right, but we don't want it to do that. We want it to get thrown up in the air and then come back down. Right? Because gravity is going to affect this ball. So let's make our variable called gravity. All right, so we will say whenever this is clicked, we want to set gravity to 10, right, which is our change Y by right now. So we'll say set gravity to 10. Then we want to forever decrease gravity by a certain amount. So it changes your Y coordinate going up, then eventually it changes and comes back down. Right, if that's a little confusing, bear with me here. Hopefully it'll make more sense when we put this together right now. We want to forever change gravity by a certain amount. And we'll say negative 1 is actually a little bit heavy, but you'll see what I'm looking at here. So when I click this, we're going to set gravity to 10, which will change my Y by 10, but it's going to forever change that by negative 1. So over time, it's going to come up and it's going to drop back down. All right, and that looks a little bit more realistic. I'll change my R key to going back to here. And because my gravity is negative 74 right now, let's do my reset is also going to bring gravity back to 0. All right, so that goes up, drops down, and that looks a little bit more realistic. Let's make it even more realistic and make this negative 0.5. So change gravity less. Right, you see I throw it twice as high. Let's make it a little bit even more, or change gravity less. We can go even down to 0.2 or 0.3, and let's see how this looks. Right, and that looks a little bit more like what we want. So that's going to be our gravity element in here. Now, before we go any further, let's put a ground down here, and let's say that whenever the basketball hits the ground, it resets back to the beginning. Kind of like I had over here with my dinosaur game. Right, if I reset these, whenever the banana hits the ground or hits the grass, right, it goes back to our dinosaur and everything resets. So we're going to put this grass down here right now and have that help us out for resetting our basketball every time it's thrown. So in our backdrop, we'll zoom out a little bit here. We are going to put in grass, take away our outline, and of course grass isn't purple, it's green. So I'll make it right here near the bottom where the cat's feet are. All right. And under our code, we'll say every time the basketball hits the grass, go back to this position, reset, set gravity to 0, and make it so we don't have to do that manually. So when this is clicked, we want to say forever if our basketball is touching this color, go back and set gravity to 0. We can also take it a step further and stop all these changes that are going to happen in here. So whenever we hit the ground, reset everything and stop all the commands. Let's see how that works. Okay, which it does. So once it touched that color, it went back to the cat, gravity 0, and we stopped everything. All right, now let's change our X component. So we've changed Y, so we have this thing getting thrown up and down. Let's change Y, getting thrown right out here. So we will have, for our event, when this is checked, we want to say forever, let's change X by 10. All right, so we're throwing it way out there. 10 seems like it's a little bit much. Let's make that, I don't know, 3. All right, that looks a little bit better. So thinking about our overall goal, what we want to have here, we want to be able to change our X velocity. This gives us values 0 through 100. So 100 being the farthest we ever want to throw, and 0 being straight up and down. So we need to have some kind of value in here that makes 0 don't go forward at all, and 100 go all the way to the other side of the screen. So we're going to put in a new variable here, and we're going to call it X velocity. If you right click on this, that's where you get that little slider button to be able to make it go all the way up or all the way down. If we put our X velocity in here and change X, that gives us the ability to change it around. So we can say put our 2 in here, and now we've just changed X by 2, and so on and so forth. Now this gives us our first problem. 5 is pretty much the maximum value we want. We don't really need to go too much further than that. Right? If I go up here to 60 or something, it's way out here. So this gives me a range that's a little unrealistic. What we can do is we can use one of our operators, and we can decrease the value of this to make it a little more normed to the values that we want. I find that if we put in here x velocity divided by 20, that keeps us in the range of the values that we're going to want to have. So if we have our value of 100 divided by 20 is actually going to give us change x by 5. So that's about what we want. Right? And if we come down in here, that makes our values a little bit more in range of how far things are in this screen. We're going to do the same thing for when we change y. It'll be a little bit more confusing, but this obviously should make some sense to you right now, or this should make some sense as to what we're doing. So change x by our x velocity divided by 20. All right, so we're almost there. We have our change in x that we can move with our slider, and now we want to change y. As far as gravity goes, that is a variable that we want, but we don't need to display it on here. It's an arbitrary measurement that's used to change our formulas around as our ball is going up and down, but we don't need to see it on here. So we'll go into variables, we'll uncheck gravity and get it out of the way. If you notice on our example game, we don't see gravity on here, but it is one of the variables. If we look inside, we see we have gravity in here among other variables, but we don't need to see it on the screen. All right, so let's get our y velocity on here, and let's get our slider so we can change that value for our basketball getting thrown out over here. All right, our y velocity or our y value. Put our slider out here so we can make that from 0 to 100. Now what we're going to do is make our y velocity mess with the variable that changes our gravity right down here. All right, we talked before about how our value is going to fluctuate between negative 0.9, which is a lot of gravity, bringing it down to the ground very quickly, and our smallest value of negative 0.1, which is don't change gravity very much, and that's going to basically be the highest throw we're possibly going to need. So we want our values to fluctuate between negative 0.9 and negative 0.1. Now the problem is our y velocity inputs over here fluctuate between 0 and 100. The formula that I've came up with for this, and you can copy this one if you want to, I can further explain it to you if you would like, but I have found that negative 1 plus y velocity divided by 100 gives us the perfect transition to filter all these values from 0 to 100 down to negative 1 to negative 0.9. Excuse me, negative 0.9 to negative 0.1. So let me actually write this out right here. Again, you can copy this formula if you want to. I found it works the best for filtering the values of our inputs. All right, so now rather than going in here and manually changing these values, we can do it with these right here. Okay, so these are about the values that we're going to want, right? Changing our X amount, changing our Y amount. This gives us the ability to shoot this basketball all the way off the screen if we want to. All right, it also gives us the ability to get some of those shorter shots that we are going to need with these values on here. Okay, I'm going to end it there, and in the next tutorials, we'll talk about the other things we need in order to make our game look a little bit more like this guy.